Hey coders, in this video we're going to look at a topic that is related to the AP Computer Science course. Even though it's not directly on the exam, you should understand a little bit about this topic, which is exceptions. Here's a little example of what an exception is. You'll see here in my runner program I've made an array, 10 index positions, and I try to access index position 99. This is a common error. Everybody in AP Computer Science knows this one. You get the array index out of bounds error. You try to access slot 99. Right? And the program stops and exits. Now what's going on here is an exception has been thrown and it stops the program. So let's show you a little bit behind the scenes of what's going on with this kind of stuff and how, if you wanted to, you could code your own exceptions. So the first thing I have here is I've made a little class called GradeFinder. And GradeFinder, really simple class. It basically has one method, and that one method is going to tell me whether or not the grade that I send in, whether or not it's a pass or a fail. Okay, that's its job. But I want a little bit extra here. Sort of like the array class, I want to make sure that the numbers that come in here are good, valid numbers. For instance, I need numbers below 0 and numbers above 100 to cause this error. This should never happen. Grades should always be 0 to 100. And so you'll see what I've done here. I've said that my method, that if the number coming in, right, the argument, is going to be less than 0 or greater than 100, to throw a new J exception, right? It's a John exception. And so what we have here is, we'll show you what this is in a second, but basically throwing this J exception is going to cause the red lines of death and stop the program force. If everything is okay, then it goes on. It can actually tell me pass, or it's going to return back fail. Okay? Now, you'll notice I have this class called JException. There's a class already built into Java called exception, and you can build off of this class by extending it to create your own exceptions. So you'll see here what my exception class is. Here's the constructor, right? Public JException. And all it does is it says system out println JException encountered invalid grade parameter. And I'm going to throw this line in. System exit 0. What this line does is it basically stops the Java program from running. So that's the total exit of the program if you encounter this type of error. Okay, and that's up to you whether or not you want to do that or not while your programs are throwing exceptions. Don't worry about this one. We'll show you this one in a second. Okay, so when we actually go to give this a run now, in our run me, you'll see here I have grade finders made. I make up a fake bad grade here of 555, and now let's test it out. I want to print out grade finder find grade G. Right? Now the first thing you're going to notice, because there's a few little rules here, is when I hover the mouse it says unreported exception J exception. So one of the rules when you do methods or classes that have exceptions, well, the first one is this. If this method possibly throws an exception, and it possibly does, right there we throw a new JException object out, then you have to declare this, throws JException. Okay? If you take that out, we get the red line saying unreported, so you get that same error, right, we just had before. So a little bit of extra work once you start using exceptions. So we need that there. Now the same goes through in our run me. Because we're using a method here that possibly throws an exception, that means that this, my main method, possibly throws an exception. So here's one solution. Throws wow, bad typing day. Throws JException. So if I add that there, the red line is taken care of. What it signifies to anybody reading this code is that a JException might be thrown at some point inside of the main method. Okay, so we've taken care of this. Now we know the number was bad. Let's give this a run. And just watch the output here. And there we go. JException encountered, invalid grade parameter, and the program's done. Right? And so that's one example, of the exception thing running. Now, just while we're here, I'm going to show you another possibility. Let's say you don't want this throws JException there. Your second option is you can say, let's try to run this code. And And keeping in mind that we might get an exception, so try to catch a J exception. I'll just call it J. And if that happens, run this code. Now, often you don't put anything here when you're just beginning programming, but if an error occurs, system out print line, I'll try to fix the problem now. And so the way these try statements work is that you try to run the code normally, and if all goes well, that's good. If an exception does occur, and it will throw out that exception line, then it jumps into this code, catching the error, and you do whatever you have to do. So let's say this was some sort of error like accessing the file system for some method. If an error did occur, maybe the catch part is now going to say, well, let's try to let the user select a different location or a different hard drive or a memory stick to try to access the material, or whatever you're going to do to try to fix the problem, right? Take a totally different branch now saying, sorry, can't access the drive, we got to do this instead. Okay, so a lot of beginner programmers don't really code with try and catch a lot, but with bigger programs, right, it's important to be able to detect the errors and handle them. Okay, so you can see here when I run this, this will still run the same. Okay, running, J exception encountered, invalid grade parameter. And if you're wondering why it didn't make it here, it didn't make it there because even though we had the exception, you'll see I did a system exit 0. And so I totally got out of there. So let's take that out. Now it's allowed to continue on, and it continues on and says, I'll try to fix the problem now. Okay, so not too bad. Now, this is almost the end of an introduction to exceptions. You saw that this here was the constructor of exceptions, and that's exactly what is called here. A new J exception is created. That's the constructor, right? So it runs this one. Now you may be asking, what's the purpose of value and what's the purpose of this one here? Well, this is a little bit extra if you want your exceptions to give back a little bit of information to the user. So I'll let you sort of look over the code here. Keep in mind our exception class has a value, and it has another constructor that takes in the num. What I'm going to do now in my grade finder is I'm going to do this. I'm going to throw in x. I'm going to use the different constructor now. So let's say they send me 555. It's going to come in. Now it's going to throw a new J exception with that one, right, with the x. So it jumps up here. It runs this one this time. It sets value equal to the number that came in. So value will be 555. It still prints out the bad stuff. Okay, so we know. But watch the extra I can do inside of run me. When I do get the error here, I can now do this. So let's say I'm going to get the error. I can now do this. System out print line. Because the exception was thrown, I actually get this exception object passed into the catch. And what this means is this exception that was just created with throw new exception, it's sent in as an argument right here. That's going to be known as J. I have a handle to it. And so what I can do here is I can say J dot, and I know J is a J exception, and it has a value variable tucked inside of it, is not a valid grade. So you can actually get some information from your exception class. Now you can get much more complicated here, like really get into the nitty-gritty. If we had a more complicated error, you can start to get values and lots of information so you know how to handle the problem. Okay, but let's just see this one work, and then that's really it. Gives you a little idea what's going on behind the scenes. So you'll see here it came back, it encountered it. 555 is not a valid, so that was the J.value right there, right? From the exception class, it jumped in, ran this, set the value, comes back, and then I'll try to fix the problem now. And that's really it. That's your basics on exceptions. Obviously, you have the two ways to try and catch, or up here you can write throws J exception. And you have a bit of an idea what's going on behind the scenes when these exceptions take place.